this was about as bizarre and as easy as it gets.
So the number for me was a number that would allow me to never have to work.
I feel like we got top.
I went from a sale of $500,000 to in debt.
$192 million.
This is Built to Sell Radio with your host, John Warlow.
So when's the last time you read a book on selling your company? My guess is you've never read a book on selling your company. Why bother when the only books out there read like textbooks, filled with acronyms and terms you've never heard of, written by people who make it their job to make themselves look and sound smarter than you? Why bother? Well, The Art of Selling Your Business tries to do exactly the opposite. It features the stories of the founders I've listened to for the podcast. I've taken their best practices, their secret hacks, and bundled them into a storytelling format so that you can take away the key lessons, the action plan, the field guide without sifting through the boring textbook that is most books on the topic of selling your company. You can get it at builttosell.com/selling. Okay, cool little story I think you're going to like coming up from a guy named Jason Flick, who built a company over 4 rounds of investments up to more than $20 million of annual revenue, at which time he sold it for more than $100 million. He talks a lot about the pros and cons of different types of investors, private equity groups, venture capitalists, even friends and family, as he built his company, You.i TV. It's a cool technology that if you've ever watched a football game or a baseball game on a device other than a television, you can thank my next guest, Jason Flick, for that. He built the connective tissue that made content run across devices. And he talks a lot about how it feels to have an investor, in his case, WarnerMedia customer. Here to tell you his entire story is Jason Flick. Jason Flick, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
Thank you, John. Looking forward to it.
Tell me a little bit about You.i TV, and you got to dumb it down for me because I am not a technology guy. So I read the press stuff and I'm like, I'm still confused. So disabuse me of that. Explain to me what You.i TV does.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you the 1 minute origin story, which probably maybe helps a bit. So 10-year-old business, the iPhone launched, 10-ish years ago. My co-founder and I, Stuart, saw the iPhone. We immediately knew this was a game changer for how people are going to relate to technology, right? My wife loved it. My 2-year-old daughter loved it. None of them wanted to do with Blackberries and Nokias of the day. And so we said, okay, and Apple's never going to license this, which everybody knew, and they wouldn't. We decided, let's create some software that can create this level of experience on what we now call every piece of glass. And so we wanted to help all these pieces of glass, devices, if you wish, to have that kind of an experience, and even got a bit of trouble by literally copying iPhone in the early days. And Apple said you can't do it. But to make the point, we really just technically copied it so we could do it. And that's what we do right up to the end. We're helping with these incredible experiences everywhere.
So when you say helping people on any piece of glass, when I think of pieces of glass, I think of all of the Apple products. So the iPhone, the iPad, and blah, blah, the Apple Watch, et cetera. So I'm assuming you're not referring to those devices because Apple creates its own software, I'd imagine. You're talking about everything else, right. Android devices.
Yeah. So we started off helping everybody else, but about midway through the business, we said, okay, where is the biggest problem to solve? So we had this piece of technology that solved it for Sony and Canon and Kobo and Canada, which was going after on the ebook space. We're doing a bunch of stuff there. But we said, really, the bigger problem seems to be apps everywhere. And of course, we're inundated with apps. Every product now, if it's got any electronics in it, it usually ships with an app. And so we wanted to solve that app problem. And apps are now on iOS and Android, but your apps are on your TV, your apps in your car, your apps are on your thermostat. And so
if I go down on my TV and flip it on, I get like, hey, you can watch like cable TV, or you can watch Netflix or Prime or the weather. So that interface that I'm looking at, someone has created that interface. I'm assuming it's some technology guy at Samsung who has created that. Are you saying that would be an example of the kind of interface you would create?
Yeah. So if you wanted to, if you were, and we focus mostly on the biggest companies in the world. So if you wanted to build an app and you wanted to be on TVs and on set-top boxes and on iOS and Android, you would have to go and download all these tools to build it for each one of these platforms. And we took a very different approach. So you build one beautiful experience and it could run on smart TVs, cars, iOS, Android. And so these big brands could have really beautiful apps and not have to maintain all those separate code bases.
So they license your software and then develop it based on that platform.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. Gosh, it sounds like a really expensive business to start. What did you and Stuart kick in a ton of cash to get this thing started, or how did it?
Yeah, we were lucky. I mean, Stuart had some IP, but you know, the comparable, like how do we get on all these platforms and not care about the platforms, is we had to build it. So the level of effort in the end to where we were, which is almost 1 million lines of code, it was equivalent to a tier 1 video game engine or a tier 1 operating system. Both, of course, you could list on your hand how many companies have built those. So yeah, it was stupidity and foolishness that we could do it. But in the end, yeah, we did. We were on dozens of platforms and we just didn't care about the platform. So
how did you finance creating 1 million lines of code? Like, what was this capital structure?
Yeah, so it was through stages. We started off bootstrapping, like a lot of companies here in Canada doing services around some core IP. And then we got a bunch of government support to kind of build it because they could see what we were doing. And then we did finally raise a first round of capital, which was private equity, which we'll talk more about that as we get into the final stages. That was a big impact. Then we raised our next round from a strategic, one of our investors, which ultimately acquired us. Then our next round was actually our first VC venture capital round. And another strategic came in on that one. So we did do all these levels of funding to continue to grow that. Because yeah, we were not at all profitable. There was no short-term goal to be a profitable business.
What was the business model? Like, how did you make money?
Yeah, so we based it off of the return on investment of not having to have what I would say 10 people for 10 months for 10 platforms, because generally a lot of these people wanted to get on 10 of these platforms with these devices, and it takes you 10 months and 10 people. So you have 100 people to try and build these apps and maintain it. One team of 10 now can build for all those platforms to give a better result. So we did a yearly fee on a per platform. So typical deals for us were in the million or millions of dollars because they were picking a bunch of platforms with a bunch of brands and then using our tech to get on all of them.
So you would go to a company like Samsung and say, give us $1 million or $2 million a year and you'll have access to our platform.
That's where we started helping those hardware manufacturers. But where we moved midway was saying, that we're going to get capped. And there's a whole piece on that, looking at kind of our competitors and how they got capped. We actually ended up going right to the final customers, to the Twitch of the world, the NFL, the NBA, the Cartoon Networks, and getting them to license our tech. And then we had no cap, right? You want to get on 25 platforms with 25 brands, that's 25 times our, $75K, $100K a year license fee.
You lost me. So when you say a cap, you're referring to a cap that they would pay you, like a brand like Samsung would pay you. Like they're not going to pay.
They would pay us once. So they would license our engine and then Samsung's covered. So you're capped by the fact that there are only so many device makers, right?
Got it. So instead you went to the end producer, if you will, the NFL, the NBA,
yeah,
and then charge them per platform, like so Android and iPhone, and they would pay you
Samsung
per platform.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. And so that way on the Samsung platform, we could get 10 to 100 licenses if there's 10 to 100 apps on that platform. Whereas if we kept working with the device manufacturers, they'd say, hey, we'll pay a license fee once, and they might have paid a bit more, but it would put a pretty quick cap on your business model.
And so like someone like the NFL or the NBA, what would they pay per platform? You mentioned 75 grand. That would be per year, I'm assuming?
Yeah. Yeah.
Got it. So it's like a SaaS model in effect. It's recurring. It is
like a SaaS model. That was always an interesting challenge. It is like a SaaS model, but it isn't quite, because there's really no, early days anyways, there was no cloud component to it, but it was sold as a SaaS model, which really did pay out well for us, right? You get the 10x on those kind of revenues versus the 1.5, as you know well, on the service type metrics, if they're just traditional.
Got it. And was that part of your intent in characterizing the revenue as SaaS-like because you knew it would impact your valuation?
Absolutely. Yeah. We had, that was a big push. All the investors wanted to see that. Nobody, type of investing we were looking for anyways, which is this higher rate of return. They all want to see recurring revenue locked in. So yeah, that was a big push. In fact, from year 5 to year 8, we went from probably 90% services to close to 50% recurring, and really aggressive at trying to flip that from doing it or having to do the services work at all on it, and B, making those recurring.
So just to be clear, by the end of that effort, you had gotten your recurring up to 50% of your revenue?
50% of the revenue, yeah.
And the other 50 was just one-off services, or not just, but
which, having looked back, I think a lot of people package those services a lot better than we did, right? They called them onboarding and packaged them into recurring components. But yeah, we would have a team. We had a world-class design team, which was a bit unique considering it was rocket science tech we were doing. And we would use those to make sure that our clients were successful, right? It was really critical because we were doing something so unique. As much as it's, you're able to understand what we did, it's complicated. Our customers thought it was impossible. So it was very new. So early days, we had to eat our own dog food, which, whatever metaphor you want to use, to really make sure they were successful, to validate this very, very different technical approach that we took.
I want to just double click on something you said earlier, which was that you've seen others, I don't know if it's fair to say mischaracterize, but certainly fudge their one-off services revenue and kind of roll it into ARR, or annual recurring revenue. So they do a one-time implementation, and instead of calling it one-time services, they would somehow package that as part of their annual recurring revenue. Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah. I mean, if you can raise enough funding and you lose money, you just say, hey, it's not 50K of licensing and 50K of services. It's 75K of licensing, and you just spread that service piece out over a while. And you can certainly do it. I see a lot of companies do it. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it, but we were very black and white about what was the actual software recurring and services. And a lot of other companies, they were just from day one all about recurring. Nothing. There was no such thing as services revenue. And I think that's something, and looking back, we probably could have been better at, because we did have people that were just available on call. We did do support through that, but we could have doubled down on that even more. And I think you don't get a lot of value out of the service piece relevant to that recurring.
Right. So in your experience, it sounds like services was sort of in the one times revenue, and the SaaS stuff, the recurring stuff was
1 in 10. I mean, whatever, maybe 8 and 1.5, whatever. But yeah, an order of magnitude difference. And so we definitely should have and probably could have pushed more there. And now, if you look at most of the banks, they have, in the last 4 or 5 years, they'll now do your lines of credit based on recurring. They'll do loans. A lot of investors, that's the only number they want to hear. And you definitely want to maximize that number as much as you can.
How was your churn? I'd be curious to know your revenue churn and your logo churn. I'm assuming logo churn was low. What about revenue churn? Maybe talk a little bit about that if you could.
Yeah. So it was a big commitment when you went on our tech. It was very, very little churn unless they shut down a brand. But there would be churn in revenue if they chose different platforms, or again, if a big client shut down one of their brands, we would see churn there. But very few of our clients that went on our tech came off, because once you get on that, having one team of 10 instead of 10 teams of 10, it's hard to go back.
It was a game changer for them. What would revenue churn have been in a given, I don't know, did you measure it monthly or annually?
We did everything annually, yeah.
So what would a typical year of revenue churn look like on a percentage basis?
Yeah, I mean, probably 5 or 10%. It's pretty small. Yeah.
Got it. I'd love to go back to the raising of capital here, because I've got so many questions about that, but it does seem like a very unique staging. So first, really, there are kind of 4 unique stages here. The first being bootstrapping and a combination of some government support and bootstrapping to kind of get the code written. And then it sounds like there was a private equity round, and then a strategic investment, and then finally a VC investment. So I'm getting the 4 stages, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Got it. And so first question relates to the private equity round. When I think of private equity, I generally think of sort of more established, later stage, less sort of high-tech startup and more sort of, like quiet little niche corner. So tell me a little bit more about the private equity round. Was this, what was going on here with this PE round?
Yeah. So because you're bootstrapped, and this is one of the risks, is you become a profitable business. That's kind of the definition of it, right? And we were closing. So we were doing maybe 2 million a year in business, and we were profitable, and we were like 30% profitable. And we had closed $10 million in business. We closed a big deal with Rogers. We closed a big deal with Chorus, another big Canadian brand that owns a whole bunch of kids brands. We closed a deal with Crackle, Sony. And we were just swamped. We're like, we now need to hire 100 people. And, but our story was just too unbelievable. Like nobody, and maybe it's on me. They didn't believe we could build an app not using iOS tools and it would be better than iOS, not also identically works on Android, not using Android tools. And so we couldn't. And so a private equity firm said, well, we just believe in the numbers. And, they knew what they were getting into and we knew what we were getting into. And it did have an impact 5-6 years later, but it was the money that was available at the time. And we did go and hire 100 people. We did execute on all that business. And then, they was a private equity firm with a tiger by the tail, right? Watch what you ask for. They got
why do you say that?
Well, because we did our A round with them, and it was in 3 tranches actually. We didn't even take the 3rd tranche, which I'm not a big fan of tranching, but I get why they want to do it. And it kind of burnt them in a sense because we didn't take it. And then our B round was 6 months later, and they got a 2x right away. So technically, they would have loved to have been in and out for 6 months and got their 2x return, but that's not how it works in this world. So they had to go along with all the ones, and they were really supportive. They were great. They followed on in every round. But they got their 2x return in 6 months when our strategic came in.
Okay,
on paper, right? On paper, they got the 2x, right?
Yeah. I'm now fully confused. You're going to have to debunk this for me or decode some of this stuff. So, first of all, what is a tranche? So you mentioned the private equity group invests in 3 tranches. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So they said it was a $10 million round, plus the bank gave us an extra line of credit for $2 million. So we called it a $12 million Canadian round, or maybe 13 Canadian when we converted it. And so the first was 2.5 million to say, hey, if you get these things you said you'd do done, then actually, I think they just gave us the first 2.5. The next one is if you get these things done, we'll give the next 2.5. And then there was too many metrics around the next round, but it was assumed that they would give us that 3rd tranche, that last 5 million.
And each tranche comes with them obviously owning more and more of your company.
Yeah. And at a valuation set in the past, right? So each
at this 2 million, 30%. So what valuation did they put on the company when it was a $2 million business?
I don't remember, but it was almost every round was 20-30% dilution, right? So because that's kind of what they all want to own. But this is going back 6 years ago, so I don't remember the details. I'm not trying to be evasive. I don't remember, but it was about a 20-30%. And the valuation was okay, but it was based on kind of what was being done, not what had been done. And we did go and execute on those deals. So I didn't really want to close the 3rd tranche, which was the biggest piece, which would have given them, 6 months later, a company doing twice the revenue they would have gotten that valuation from 6 months prior. So
right, because if you had taken the 3rd chunk, you would have given up more of the company.
Yeah, more
low valuation.
Yeah, more dilution for everyone. And then so a strategic came in. It was Churn at the time, which then got bought by WarnerMedia, which then got bought by AT&T, and they did a B round for us, which interestingly enough really wasn't the B round, right? Because we gave up a chunk of the A, but they really wanted to call it a B. Everybody wants to lead a round, right? But in essence, that kind of did set us off a little bit.
I've always wanted to know, like, this A, B round, like, I don't get it at all. So, like, is there some sort of official governing body that says this is an A round and this is a B round? Like, is there any definition, or is it just the entrepreneur makes up the shit and they say, yeah, this is in my A round? Like, is it adjudicated by anyone, or is it actually just you making it up?
No, but it does have a huge impact. It is not. It is a very loose set of terms, but it has a huge impact. So on your seed round, it's assuming you probably don't have any revenue. On your A round, you probably have some. On your B round, you're in growth, and you've probably figured your business model out. On C round, there's some scale, maybe some side vectors, and then D round is your last round before IPO, right? And that's your real scale one. That's kind of the rule of thumb. And because we gave up half of our A round and did a B round so quickly, we were being perceived in that, yes, very nascent B round bucket, and we weren't really there. And that did kind of, was a ghost behind us all the time, kind of.
In what way?
It's a bit, because we were always, B minus 0.5, C minus 0.5, D minus 0.5, because of that. The A round didn't really get finished.
And in what way did that impact you?
Yeah, valuations, expectations. So each round is a little bit harder to raise because they said, oh, you're going for your C. So these are kind of the things we're looking for. Well, we're not quite there at that because, you're always kind of half a round behind in terms of the metrics that they're looking for.
And when you say metrics, are you referring to revenue?
Revenue is a metric, consistency. Again, each one looks at it different. Even different countries have different definitions for them. But yeah, growth, percentage of growth factor, it matters. And in the earlier rounds, you can have higher growth. As you get bigger, you can have a little bit lower, but still you look for top line revenue numbers.
Got it. So 6 months after the private equity group, the round from the second tranche, you took the second tranche, you did a further financing with what you said was Turner, which became Warner, which in turn became AT&T. Yeah. So what was the valuation Turner was putting on the company? Were they using a multiple of revenue? Do you remember what the valuation was there?
I remember it doubled because it was pretty low with a private equity firm. Because again, we were a profitable services company that said we had product, and we did, but very little of our revenue was licensing. So they actually came in and priced us as a product company. They also made a bet on our tech. They doubled down our tech. They gave us millions of dollars worth of business. They gave us all their big brands, their sporting brands, their Cartoon Network, TNT, TBS, all their.
Oh, so these guys were not only an investor, they were also a customer.
Yeah, which really plays out in the whole journey too. Yes.
That must be weird because on one hand, they're a customer and you want to, but then the next breath they're like
sitting on the board.
The board. That's got to be weird. Like, how do you manage that dynamic?
It's in the end, I believe, and I believed it then too, it's equally good and bad. So bad for all the obvious creepy rules, right? If things are going bad, if they want to push agendas, all those, and that didn't happen too much, but can and did happen a few times. All the positives though, like really hard to get off your tech. When you almost expect intros to all the different business units. If they don't choose you, it's like, hey, why aren't you? They'd never just turn your service off. They got to talk to you. Taking an investor is not dissimilar to getting married, right? This is a long-term commitment. So that helped us. And they also helped us, break new ground. They would be our customers for a lot of the new technology and trying things out. So I would say it's a pro and con, and I can go through the list of all of them, but yes, it is tricky and you have to ask them to leave the boardroom sometimes. But also a lot of synergy. They would say, hey, I know those guys over at Disney. Let me give you an intro. Thank you.
Right. Disney sounds good.
They wouldn't do it, but as an investor, they would.
I think it would be helpful for our listeners to hear an example of when you had to ask the Turner board members to leave the boardroom. Like, can you share a story about what was being discussed that required them to ask you'd ask them to leave? And I'd be curious to know, like, how does that work? Do you just turn to them and say, hey, Steve and Mark or Mary and Jane, like, can you guys leave? We're going to talk behind your back. Like, how does that work? Exactly?
Yeah. So, to me, a well-run board meeting, which is where a lot of stuff happens, there's a lot of prep work in advance for it, right? So the board meeting is a little bit of the end result of all that work. So we would already know, we'd have scheduled it. We'd let them know this agenda item, you need to walk out. Obviously we haven't got into it yet, but the next round with the VC, we actually had Comcast and Sky, which AT&T, Comcast are competitors. So any of those conversations, we'd ask them to step out it did change eventually how I can present. I couldn't present all of our revenue and pipeline because I've got Comcast and AT&T sitting at the board now. One was an observer, one was a board member, so that helped a little bit too, but also added some complexity. But yeah, there was a few times. There's probably more times I wish I could ask them to leave so they didn't know. It's like, hey, look at this deal we're doing over here, and we're going to cut a deal because of this and this and that. Can you please plug your ears? Like, there's times I wish I could have asked them to leave when I had no right to ask them to leave. But again,
so in other words, you were going to reveal that you were going to lower your price or provide some sort of special concession, and they're like, note to self, ask that next time.
Yeah, they're going to see that, and actually, because we had at one point 18 active projects across WarnerMedia, Warner Brothers, AT&T, DirecTV, all owned by them. And it's different deals and different structure. When you go in, we had business with the Latin American division. You might imagine that a dollar in Latin America is different than a dollar in the US or Canada. So yeah, a lot of different pricing stuff. It worked out, but yeah, it is an interesting challenge. I would say both good and bad. So I wouldn't discourage people or encourage it. It's just be aware. It is.
And with the strategic investment from Turner, did they negotiate for an option to buy all of the company at a predetermined price?
So we had almost every customer was big enough. They all wanted to invest. They all wanted a first right of refusal. They all wanted that even notice. And we said no to all of it. We always said 100% separate business transaction from investment. And that pissed off a few. And there was a few big investors that didn't invest because of it, but always kept that clean. I call that a poison pill, right? If they have a first right of refusal, no one's going to do all the hard work to get to a price to have them go, and we'll pay $1 more. So we never allowed that. And some customers almost said, oh, every deal we do with a small company, even when we were 200 people, we were small to some of these early deals. And they said, no. And you just had to say no and put your foot down. But yeah, that's, yeah.
So Warner would, or Turner would say, look, we'll give you X million dollars for Y% of your business, but we want the rights to buy 100% of the business at this cap. That would be a common negotiating request from someone like a big strategic, to which you just said no.
No. And what we did in the end, that was how we compromised, and that was they got a board seat. So you're going to see everything. You're going to see us all squirming in our seats metaphorically when we have an offer. So you're going to kind of smell something's up, but you don't get a first right of refusal.
Got it. That's helpful. And how long did you go with the funds from Turner, the strategic, before raising a VC? And I'd be curious to know why raise the VC round and how the private equity company reacted when you did that. Yeah.
It was an interesting one. So, I mean, we always wanted to raise VC because we knew that's what we were doing, right? We really were a highly disruptive technology that had tremendous growth potential, and we knew that's more of a VC play. But I think
let me just push you a little bit there, Jay. Like, why not just go back to, you have these companies that have more money than God. I mean, they're, $100 billion market capitalization. Why not, just go back to the Turners and the Comcasts instead of going to the VC? Why not just go back to the guys who invested in the second round and say, let's re-up?
So everybody did follow up on every follow-on round, but it's not the business they're in. You look at the Turner investment, they did it to get the board. They really bought a board seat for $5-6 million. And that's what they're not really in the, hey, let me give you 20-30 million so I can make a 10x on that. That's not the business they're in. And they were okay with it because they saw the value in us. The more platforms we got on, the more reach we got on, the better for them. But yeah, they would not, it's not the business we're in. We needed someone who was in the business of doing, putting in $1 million or 10 million and getting out 100 million or $1 billion.
Got it. And so you went out to the VC community. What was the reaction?
So again, the 0.5 round, always kind of being there behind, was a bit of a challenge, but we closed again an enormous amount of business in 1 year, and that really helped bolster our story. And we did close a round out of Boston, Causeway Ventures. They were great. They're actually specialists in the media vertical, which was great. So they did our C round, and that gave us the capital to really go international. So that capital allowed us to go from almost 100% of our business in North America to 60% of it, 40% of it.
How much did you raise in that C round?
It was a $23 million C round.
Got it.
Again, about a 25% dilution for that round, which is pretty traditional.
Yeah. Did you and Stuart ever sort of sit back and say, hold on a minute, like we're giving up all this equity. Like, did we just want to maybe put the brakes on, and just going to ride this out? Like, clearly you'd been successful. You'd created some incredible technology. Like, was there ever a moment where you said, let's just stop at the strategic investor and become really profitable and ride this out and keep the remaining tranche of equity? Like, did that conversation come up at all?
Yeah, we certainly talked about it a lot, and each round usually comes with a liquidation preference, right? So it's a layer on top of that layer. The problem is we have...
Sorry, what's a liquidation preference?
So most VCs, when you invest money, they get their money out first and then they participate, right? So participating shares. So each one of those, it's a 20% dilution, but then on top of that, they get their money out first, which if it's a big exit, that's irrelevant. If it's not a big exit, that can be relevant. So for sure, we thought about it a lot. The challenge was it was a bit of a race, right? It wasn't a race. We had a competitor because only in the end, in the last year, do we have a real meaningful competitor. But it was about this core piece of IP that you had to get on all these platforms. And there was probably half of the money just went to moving that ahead and keeping it rolling. And so if you decided not to raise capital, you'd have to get profitable. You'd have to let go half that engineering team. And then I don't know that we kept our head above the water in terms of the platform. Like, we had to be at least as good as Apple, as good as Android, as good as Samsung. If you're way less, then you start selling a sub-premium solution that just saves money. And we did not want to do that. We didn't go into it, but we were a premium solution, right? We were the Ferrari of apps. They were all gorgeous. They were like video games. Most of the apps were so fun to use. You felt like you were playing a bit of a game. And that was our goal. If we didn't have funding, we would have had to pull back and say, hey, we're just going to be a crappy good enough. And then guess what? They don't want to pay much for that. So then you really get in the spiral of, oh, now you only pay 10 grand instead of 100 grand. Wow. So I think we made the right decision to keep doing it. But yeah, all these things conspire eventually, which is what we'll get to. And you have to make a choice about to keep going or not.
I'm reminded, do you remember the Indiana Jones movie? I think it was the first one where the massive boulder comes tearing at him and he's like, running away from it kind of feels like that. Like, you clicked off this boulder of like raising money and it's like, hold on, kids, because this is going.
If you go and raise your seed round or A round, for sure, you now have this boulder, and it's every 18 to 24 months you have to go. Some companies could pull back and do it, but we have this massive chunk of IP that the core stuff is great, but it constantly needed to be maintained, right? As Apple made tweaks, we had to make those tweaks too.
You mentioned there was an interesting reaction the private equity group had to the VCs. So if I'm getting this right, the private equity group would not have had the liquidation preference. So here they are betting on you guys as a small upstart. And they see these VCs swooping in and getting these preferred shares and this liquidation preference. And they're probably sitting there saying, hold on a second, we backed you guys from the beginning. How come we didn't get the fancy shares? Was that the dynamic? I'm putting words in your mouth.
I'll tell you, the number of times we had lawyers go, their lawyers, both the VCs and the private equity and the strategics go, I've never seen this term ever in a deal in my life. If I had a buck for every time I heard that, I'd have
what would a deal term be that they'd be like, are you kidding me?
So one of them was the interest rate. They wanted, on top of their preference, they wanted interest rate, but not paid. Well, they wanted it paid in real time, which we said no to. So then they wanted that paid. And VCs, you never charge interest on your money. That's never done. And then a VC term, so that would be a private equity term that they'd want. A VC term, gosh, I don't know off the top of my head, I can think of one, but yeah, they're definitely, in terms of what they're expecting and how much control they want of the money, of the reporting, those sorts of things, you're very different. Private equity, much more hands-on, want lots more detail, very little risk. And then on the VC and strategic side, they just want to swing for the fence. There's a lot of, we just trust you, run hard, let's go and change the world. They know it comes down to the team executing, whereas private equity, I think, is always like, they just want to, be able to just pull back and say, you know what, that's too far, let's pull back on that, right? And so just the terms, all the terms that link to that, it was interesting. And I was able to find balances because we were really a middle risk deal. We absolutely had enough revenue and huge clients that they couldn't churn. But we also had enough potential that, if we turn the right levers, this could be the next billion-dollar company for everyone to own the glass. So I was able to leverage the two against each other and get some nice middle grounds. But that was a constant effort for me.
Yeah, sounds like it. So how big did you get this company before you chose to sell it outright? What was the revenue, number of employees, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I think we probably peaked around 300 people, probably 24, 25 million in revenue was our peak. These are all we're in Canada, but US, those are all US numbers. So it was a good size. We went through a lot of the major inflection points. The risk was all gone. But that doesn't mean you just keep going and do it either. There's always each inflection point, I think, brings a new risk. And the more capital you raise, the more expectations. I feel sad when I see some of the companies out there, they raised 100 million and they sold for 100 million. Well, that means that, you had to have made a side deal for a little bit of money for all the staff, right? And that can happen if you they don't, there's not a lot of patience in there, right? If you have a bad year, that's it. That's the year you probably have to bail and not get anything. So it's a very tricky game.
Wow. Again, so 25 million top line, roughly half was this recurring SaaS-like revenue, and then the other half was more kind of implementation services revenue.
Yeah.
Got it. And the final, well, let's get into the final sale price now. Before we go further, let me ask you about the triggers. So what caused, what was the trigger? You mentioned there was a competitor. What actually was the straw that broke the camel's back to say we're going to pull a trigger here?
Yeah. So, luckily I've always built it knowing that this is something that's going to happen. You always have a plan A, B, and C, and C is usually sell, right? But you always, plan A is grow the business as aggressively as you can. That's always your best value lever. But I would say a few things came together. Private equity tends to want, 5 years, kind of their window. They were on 6. There was this small thing, which again, this is public, called HBO streaming service, which you need to go from 0 to billions in revenue. And they needed technology. They needed a piece that we had. And so that timing was there.
Meaning you thought you could get them to bid on the company?
Yeah. Well, they were clear that if you look at the battle that's going on in the streaming wars, right, it's a technology battle now, right? It used to be a content battle. Content was king is the old expression we've all heard of. That's not the case anymore, right? Content isn't king. There is tons of great content out there. Everybody has great content. So it's really a technology battle, and Netflix is by far the most equipped, right? It's already on every piece of glass. My car has Netflix on it. I don't know if I have a piece of glass that doesn't have Netflix on it. So they need to get there. And so we were that missing piece, and they really didn't want others to have that.
It's fun. It's funny because the pandemic has caused my wife and I to watch more television, I admit it. Yeah. And we've just subscribed to HBO Crave. I don't know what the difference is between HBO and Crave. But their interface.
That's an old deal. Crave licenses, Bell owns Crave licenses from HBO, but eventually it will be HBO Direct. But
I don't know what it's like in the US, but in Canada, it is terrible. The interface is like from 1986. It looks like the Dewey Decimal System for trying to find a movie. It's so terrible. Painful.
And as a person who is in that business,
oh my God, it must be like excruciating.
And yes, we tried to win that business, but they just couldn't. It's a big, slow organization that takes a long time.
I wish you had, because it would make my life a little easier. Anyways, that's beside the point. But HBO is out there. So you're figuring they are going to want to maybe make a play for your company. What next? Did you hire bankers, or did you go to tell me about the actual process? Yeah,
we actually used an iBanker because we always knew maybe that was going to happen. We saw this coming. They were telling us. So we said, well, we'll get an iBanker to help do our D round. And then if it does turn this, we have an iBanker there. I regret using iBanker for the D round. I don't think that was wise. They're investing in who we are, what we are. And again, we were always 0.5 off a round. So you couldn't look at just the numbers. You need to look at the brands, like Twitch is using us, and look at the number of developers and platforms we're installed on, right? You did need to look at the business a little bit. Just looking at the revenue numbers, even though we doubled for 5-6 years in a row, we hit an inflection point where it was about getting our tool to others, right? And it was about getting that community going, which is not about revenue. So they had to dig in a little bit, and iBankers aren't good for that. If they need to invest in your vision, your passion, iBanker, that was not good.
Okay, so when you say iBanker, you're referring to an investment banker, and you're referring to a certain sort of status of investment banker, namely one of the large sort of bank-owned groups, or who did you go with? Like, what was that?
Yeah, it was one of the mainstream, one of the large ones, and they're just. I think you're still when you're raising capital, it's still a relationship. Again, it's like marriage. You're getting married with these funds, and to put a middle person between you and them was not good. So I think that there was a bunch of things, but that didn't help the D round, which then took. It got to the point where it'd been, the pandemic hit, of course, all these things. It's like, do we? And they made it clear, hey, there's this massive deal that you could have, but they probably, which they were pretty clear about, wanted to own it, to be part of that stack. They don't want any of their competitors to have it because we're such a huge advantage. So we said, okay, D round's not doing great. Again, I think a bunch of reasons, but the iBanker won. They're very interested. It's timing's right for them.
So they being AT&T and Warner.
AT&T, yeah, WarnerMedia. So HBO is owned by WarnerMedia, which is owned by AT&T.
Okay. I didn't realize HBO.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
okay.
It is so confusing. And like, if you figure out these media brands, it is tough. So yeah, they're all in the same family. So we were so deep across that organization. And then for them to let us keep powering their competitors, right, in the streaming wars, they didn't want that.
And so so the what you refer to as the D round. So this is, you've raised venture capital though, right? And so that's in the bank, you're growing. So the D round would have been another round after that, pre-IPO, for example. And so that's in the market, and it's undersubscribed, meaning you're not getting a ton of interest. People are like, it's kind of half where, it's not what we would, I don't mean put words in your mouth. Okay. And at the same time, you're having meetings where, like, how did AT&T Warner sort of raise the specter of potentially buying you outright? Was that a conversation over a beer, or like, was it a board meeting? Like, how did that actually get
unfortunately, it had always been an assumption, and it's both a positive and negative. Everyone who looked at us, even for investors, it's another reason the D round wasn't great. It's like, wow, you're so fundamental to these guys. You're running like almost every brand I'm aware of. That, and then, to your point, a bunch I didn't even know they owned, and you're running all of them. So I think that was a bit of a detriment. But
why would a VC? Why would anybody care? I mean, it sounds great that you were doing all this work with this.
Yeah,
this company.
It can be great because but it's also a single point of fault, right? They can say, hey, and of course they were so many different brands they wouldn't be able to. But in theory, they could say, hey, we're just going to turn the tap off. We don't like the new investor you picked, and so we're going to turn the tap off on your revenue, which is not realistic. It's not a real scenario, but they could imagine it to be one, and therefore wow, okay, then the company just lost a huge chunk of its revenue. So that's the risk they perceive, is that that's a single point of fault from one customer. I perceived it as, look, we just did this for AT&T. Now imagine Comcast. Now imagine Verizon, Liberty Global. All these there was hundreds of multi-billion-dollar operators that we could do exactly what we did with AT&T.
How much of your overall 25 million revenue was coming from one of AT&T Warner's sort of brands?
Yeah, between services was a bit higher, but the recurring part was about a third, maybe a little bit more than a third. So a bit more than a third of our revenue is them. So significant.
Got it. That's helpful. And again, back to my question. So the assumption has always been there. It's sort of like the elephant in the room. How does it go from the elephant in the room to the actual proactive conversation with AT&T Warner?
Yeah, so it was weird. I mean, so 2 years ago when they got acquired, I don't remember when AT&T bought Turner, they had said, hey, we've got powder keg of of money. We're going to buy all these companies. And they did go and buy a bunch of companies. And they had all told us that we were on that list. So 2 years ago, almost every employee knew, which they thought they knew, that they were going to buy us, which was not good. I know it's on your list of not things. We couldn't really stop it though. They were like telling my salespeople, my managers, oh, we're going to buy you guys. This is amazing. We're going to go change the world of AT&T.
Did those employees have shares in your company?
Yeah, every employee gets ownership.
Or options? Okay.
Yeah, everybody gets some.
So they're like, all right.
Yeah.
When do we start?
I think it's critical, especially in an IT world where this is all about how passionate you are about what you're doing.
Yeah, but they're I'm assuming now learning that you're potentially for sale, and that's probably pretty distracting for them. No,
it was, and for the leadership team even more so, right? Because the day-to-day team is like, well, the bulk of the revenues back then is even more than that percentage. The bulk of the revenues coming from who's going to buy it. So just keep doing your day job; it's all good, and you're not even going to notice that much of a difference. You're going to get some cash and keep working on the same projects, right? So it wasn't as scary, but it was very distracting for the executive and management team, and I do think that really took us off track. And then in the end, there was some executive shuffles that happened, and the executives that would have probably pushed for us to be bought didn't get their moves till a year later, so it didn't happen. So that was definitely a tough spot, and we missed some revenue targets. We had to let, I think it was like 12 people go, which is a tiny number, but it's, it hits hard. It's like, wow, we were this company doubling every year for 4 or 5 years straight. We were the fastest growing company in Deloitte's list and in Canada for 2 or 3 years, and then to have also let people go. So that was a really tough, dark time. But then we got out of that. We raised our funding and we made a bunch of new milestones. And then when this round we were much savvier. I kept that tiny group involved. Tried to keep it as under wrap as we could, and to your point, it's just not healthy for anybody to know. So that was a.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm clear. So the employees found out when did the employees find out that when was the Turner / Warner AT&T folks, when were they talking to your employees saying, "Oh, we're just going to buy you"? Was that in advance of the VC round or at the stage of the D round?
Oh yeah, this was probably midway to the C round. They were saying that they were going to do that because it was so many different brands and they all communicate with each other. Like, oh, this is so. It was hard to stop that, and so I couldn't really control it. I'd have to say, "Hey guys, we don't know. You got to just keep focusing on stuff."
And what triggered you to have to lay people off? I wasn't clear on that piece.
So because we were so distracted with them buying us, we focused on them way too much and their revenue didn't grow, right? The extra focus on them didn't increase our revenue. In fact, it decreased revenue elsewhere. So then, and we wanted to make sure we had the runway. So when you go out and seek funding, you want at least 6 to 12 months to raise the capital. And this had thrown our funding cycle off a bit. So you have to, which sucks, right? You've still got millions in the bank, but you've got these 11 or 12 people make it so that you've only got 3 or 4 months of runway instead of 6 or 8, and so that wasn't great. And then there's the service piece too. Yeah, you have to always tune the service piece. I think some of the services had gone down. So yeah, you lose, and I've heard some of your other speakers talk about it, right? When you start getting that investment, it really messes your business up and softens. I think was one of the customers, and so yeah, we had a softening of our business and. You have to make things make sense financially, right? You still have to run a certain monthly burn.
Got it. So again, maybe my memory is failing me, but did we cover like how the conversation went from the elephant in the room to actually a term sheet?
No, it was pretty slow. I mean, they had told us way before, hey, this project is so massively important to us. We'll never give you the deal unless we buy you. So that was awkward. And then we slowly started seeing we were going to win that deal. So again, that was still fairly obvious. And
this is the HBO deal? This
is the massive HBO deal, right? And then, 6 months in, it was pretty clear we won it and they still hadn't closed the deal. And people are going, what? We're pretty sure we won this. It's pretty obvious. Or like we're deep into their business. We're pretty sure we won this. Why haven't they done the deal? And I think a lot of people, there was definitely a couple of months of awkwardness there where it was certainly a month of awkwardness for us. And then they started talking to me about it and the team. And we actually even brought in an we had a board seat open. So we brought in one of our ex customers from them, which helped to kind of, communicate and get that rolling. probably maybe even made it too easy by bringing one of their ex-employees on as a board member. But yeah, it slowly started happening. And then, they said, yeah, we're going to send you a term sheet. But of course, when you talk to AT&T size companies, everything they say is always plus a week or plus a couple of weeks. So it took much longer than we thought.
And okay, so you're working on this HBO proposal. It's clear you've won it based on how integrated the conversations you're having it seemed clear. Yet, like, they haven't. Do they have a price in front of them? Like, are they saying you'd like it's going to be $75,000 a year times all your platforms?
Yeah. Well, so there was an interesting little game that I played as well. So the market really for us, because we were going after the giants, and in the last 2 years, the giants went from being a whole bunch of brands that were kind of upstarts like Crunchyroll and these hip new brands, all of a sudden became about Peacock, Disney, HBO Max, Netflix, obviously, and Amazon. So these 5 giants. So I'd actually retuned the business and pulled away from going down market, which wasn't working out as well as we wanted for a lot of reasons. I said, all right, let's go wide. And so instead of getting on 12 devices, which is kind of the Samsung TVs and the iOS and Android, I said, let's get on hundreds. Let's get on cars. Let's get on set-top boxes. And so what we put before them, which was based on current pricing, a millions and millions and millions of dollars of deal in front of them and all their competitors, saying, hey, if you want to get on every set-top box and every car, you can't all go do it yourself. There's not enough memory in the set-top boxes, not enough memory in all these devices. Pick us, be part of this founders group, pre-license this stuff, and I'll skip my D round, and everybody wins. And that really scared them. And
because effectively that veiled threat would have given their direct competitors this.
Yeah, we were going to say, let's make
sauce.
Getting on every piece of glass a commodity, right? Which a whole bunch of them wanted, but whoever could get us instead of that would be at a huge advantage, right? There's no technical competitor to Netflix. Even the Disney guys, they're just doing it with thousands of developers.
So that threat got them off the hop, if you will.
Yeah. So I had to help a little bit too. So that got them like, wow, okay, so now your licensing is going to go from 10 million or whatever to 100 million a year. Okay, well, in the next 5 years, okay, well, man, that doesn't make sense. We should probably buy you. So I think that also encouraged them. So, and that was us playing to kind of get them off, because either we do the DRAN or you buy us. One or the other has to happen. You got to pick one at some point and put 2 or 3 months into due diligence to get it done. And it was pretty obvious that was the better way to go. And investors saw that, we saw it. And so that was one of the things we did that, they said, holy crap, okay, now I can do a clear ROI even for buying.
Yeah. Instead of $500 million of licensing fees, I can pay X and own the company. So what was their term sheet? What was your reaction to the term sheet?
Yeah. So we went back and forth, and, I was always advised, don't share the number first, right? Like whoever speaks first loses, right? On the pricing side, this old sales analogy, right? I don't think that was the best advice. I think, we believed we had a huge opportunity. We knew how the obscene amount of money we would save them. And our board didn't want to speak first. So then they spoke first. Well, that's, they always know, everyone knows they pay a lot, and they are who they always do cash deals, right? So that wasn't it. So there's a whole bunch of these things to do. So of course they do what they always did, which is they lowball, and then you got to fight your way up. And I would go back in time and say, yeah, let's just give them the friggin' number. Like, go against common sense, say this number, and then go down. But of course, what if the number we came in was twice what we were going to give them? But we knew it wasn't going to be. So they gave us a number, and then we had to go say, come on, really? And then you go back and forth, and you do a bunch of dancing.
And what was the number they came up with? What the number, the original offer?
Yeah, it was about 20% less than we got. It was a deal we knew they wouldn't take. And to you, I think you've seen that on your other some other people have said, do you tell them what you want, what your lowest number is? And again, having a private equity that was happy to have probably exited 4 years ago, and going like, wow, exciting. Having our VC go, okay, this is cool. We've only been in for a little while, so I guess it's still a good exit. And then me, who knows, we knew how much money, like the savings were crazy that they were going to make with our tech. And so, yeah, just going through all that, and we had to have a whole bunch of extra meetings, and it's as much political as it is reality too, right? And can you get other, as you've said before too, can you get other bidders to the table? Well, really hard to do when you have someone there who knows there isn't really a reasonable price limit. To your point, they I don't know, I think they had done about a month or two before the deal, they had done a $4 billion cash buyback just for fun, right? Like I know, like, we got some debt and they just spent $4 billion. And we knew that the CFO of AT&T and the CEO were involved. They had approved. So we're like, these guys who really don't get into meetings that aren't, in the billions of dollars numbers, why are we getting? So, yeah, so it was a lot of back and forth. And, in the end, I think good. But yeah, there was, as always, right, there's more to be had. And I think everybody was probably a little bit unhappy. And again, they weren't picking us up, which is now public knowledge. They weren't buying us to take us to be the billion-dollar company we knew we could be. They were buying us to just lock us down and make us their own differentiator, which is a very different metric, right, to measure. But they had to also look at revenue metrics and recurring revenue metrics. So again, I think we had really good support. I had good lawyers. They all did good stuff. But again, I don't know that the iBanker added a lot of value in there, right? My takeaway, I always thought iBankers there to maximize your value, and I always thought that for housing too. But I mean, in the end, it really felt like it was just get the deal done, right? Which I've used people selling a house too. Generally speaking, they'd rather sell 10 houses at 20% less than sell one house at 20% more, right? Like, we're not stupid, right? So I really felt like it's like, yeah, let's just do this deal. Who cares? And so, I was kind of on my own to fight to get it, to get back to a reasonable number.
Right, because the private equity group, I'm assuming, were thrilled with the outcome, and they wanted out, so they were like, "Okay, Jason, let's go."
Anything, even whatever they offered us, take even less than that. We don't.
Yeah. Interesting dynamic, and of course the other investor, Turner / Warner / AT&T, or it's
their owners, right? So so that was a big part for them.
And then you've got the VCs who were in early and weren't going to get the big, what do you call it, unicorn kind of style exit. So they're...
So you got to look at all those dynamics, market timing, and COVID added a lot of risk to every business, right? And to your point, you're watching a lot more streaming, so it's definitely increased it. But also with Peacock and HBO Max, like all those burgeoning services, Red Bull has a service, A&E has a service, all these burgeoning services that we're trying to get ahead for the next couple of years are going to be in trouble because Disney, Peacock, HBO, Amazon are putting billions into this. They're going to have to let that all settle down, become kind of just the regular flow, and then get above. And so I think the risk profile was increasing. Now we weren't.
When you say Peacock, are you referring to NBC?
Yeah, the NBC Peacock streaming solution. Yeah, the NBC Comcast, and they own Sky too, which not a lot of people know. So yeah, it's a big
interesting. And so, what was the final sale price? What was reported?
Yeah, I think it was said to be over 100 million, but it was definitely within that range. Yeah, a lot of stuff leaked because of the way the deal was structured. AT&T went a very formal process, which required courts and disclosure. There were some really awkward times where the staff were fully aware of what's going on. And as you said before, wait for the cash in the bank. The cash was still weeks and weeks away from being in the bank, but we had to involve staff because they wanted to lock key people in. They wanted to get shareholder approval. Well, I've given shares and equity to every single employee. So pretty quickly, when you say I want to make shareholders aware of this, that's every one of my employees. So there's lots of weird, there were some real awkward moments in there, but the team was awesome. They stuck by it. They got it done. And we all knew they were going to get taken care of well, right? I don't want to speak badly of private equity deals, but when you get bought by a private equity, step one, efficiency, right? And they just really they wanted us to be exactly who we are, just doing it for them. And so I think A was online with the vision, right? We want to get on every piece of glass. I think HBO has been pretty clear. They want to get everyone every piece of glass. They have to, even if they're not saying it. And so now our engine, you won't be able to turn on a device probably in the next 2 years, and our stuff won't be on it. So that was one of our immaterial, or less tangible, but kind of more, or less not financial, but more visionary goals, and we're going to achieve that now for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What a neat legacy to know that everybody's there's millions and tens of millions of devices out there that are running the stuff that you created back
that was
so many years ago.
We're like, how do we be on everything? How do we get pre-embedded? And we were definitely getting there. So it was exciting. Hundreds of millions of our engine. I imagine most devices in your house, if they can play video, they've got our engine on. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Interesting. It sounds like it is an amazing story with so many lessons inherent within it. If you could do one thing differently, knowing everything that you know now, what might you have done differently at a tactical level that might have been?
Yeah, I mean,
hindsight's 2020, right?
Yeah. So I mean, luckily, I had a lot of peer mentorship and sitting down a lot of time with CEO. So a lot of the basic stuff I didn't get wrong. I think we did the planning, the process, and culture, and all those really critical things. I think we did a really good job on those. If I look at just the end result, I would have loved, our vision was always, that it was more of a Microsoft, Google, Adobe, Amazon type exit if we went to the full, because those are the ones that really need to get on every piece of glass and can monetize that, right? So, and I was never able to, because they weren't our customers, we would never sell an engine, a license to them. We could never get engaged with them. So we never got on the radar. And I did try in the last year or two to get that. I don't know if it's plausible, but I wish that they were more aware of us and somehow going on the journey. Maybe they need to be one of our strategic investors. I don't know. But to me, the home run that I know we could have been would have required a Microsoft, Amazon, Adobe to be there and go, holy crap. Like, I mean, we all know Flash, right? Flash failed. We are what Flash wishes it could have been had it been, been thought of 10 years later. And so all those guys just weren't at the table, and I didn't know how to get them there. And they didn't come on their own because they're just so huge. So I would go back. I wish I could. That's one thing I could have fixed, that they would be there. We try to do some strategic projects with them, but man, they're just so huge, right? So
hard to find. There was that old Harvey McKay book. This goes back 30 years, where he's like, who buys the balloons? Was that the expression? Meaning, like, in these giant companies, there's somebody who actually has a job of doing the kind of, but it's just finding that person within the company.
Well, and that person, but then that person isn't. So if you look at Amazon or Microsoft or Google, they have so many business units. That person is so busy. You have to be in the tens of billions to even be relevant to them. Right. And we weren't there. We could be, we could be the Shopify of glass, right? But that person is so inundated, and they're not broken down by groups. They're almost all centralized. And so, yeah, it's a tricky one. So yeah, that might be the one. I think, I'm pretty proud of the culture we built and the accomplishments we did and how we did it technically. But yeah, I wish we could have got one of those there, because it's, in 4 or 5 years, look back, you're going to see what we're doing. That's going to be commonplace. There's only one competitor right now, it's Google. It's only been out for a year or so. But what we were doing 10 years ago will be commonplace in the next 2 years. And then you go, shit, what if you hadn't? Now, there was no realistic path to not, unless it was, some sort of brimstone approach. But yeah.
How did you and Stuart commemorate the sale?
This is the thing. It was such a gradual thing, right? And there's so many milestones. Like you said, cash in the bank. Even that, we ended up picking some firm that is a middleman between the middlemen, because there's a holdback. And I mean, cash in the bank was weeks after done. Like, so there was so many phases. So we celebrated a bunch of times, kind of informally, but there was never that now it's done. And I was kind of thinking money in the bank, but that just dragged on forever. Right into the new year and stuff. So I think we haven't yet done it. And COVID, I think, is our excuse. So we will be doing a lot of celebrating later. And it's unfortunate. I would have loved to have been just a ta-da, we've sold. But because of the way the deal went, and because there's such a large client, it was 6 months of ta-da. I don't know how you can bring ta-da on for 6 months, but that's kind of how it was from my perspective anyways.
How has it been for you personally, just psychologically? I've heard from a lot of entrepreneurs, they go through the amazing high of the sale, and then there's a drop off just emotionally, where the money's in the bank, that's great, but there's also sort of a lack of purpose. Did you go through any of those emotional sort of down times?
I think I am. I mean, luckily, I've, again, had a lot of CEOs I've seen sell, so I knew what I was getting into. This is my 10th startup in some capacity of leadership. So I've seen a bunch of people go through it. I've known money isn't, just generally speaking, living in Canada, money for most of us isn't, you can probably do what you want. So I knew a lot of that, but yeah, I've got to find my new purpose, my new passion. I'm trying to just say no to everything except for just reaching out, sharing, talking to people. But I've had CEO offers, I've had investments I'm just saying, no, I want to just let it settle in. I never let myself believe the deal was done, even when it was so obvious, because if you don't have I'm going to keep running this, then, we want to offer you half. Well, you got to keep saying yes, right? So I never really, right up to the end, I said, no, if I have to run this, I will. I want to. I'm okay with it. And then when it finally happened, I'm like, okay, I guess I can stop saying I'll keep writing because now I can't anymore. And so I think it's all still settling in. It's going to be, it's the new journey for me. I'll catch up on some more of your other guests who maybe were not just as freshly exited as me and learn a bit from there. But certainly I'm going to keep doing it. I mean, this is in your blood. I love building businesses. I love all the stuff that's involved in it, the chase of the big deals. I just love it. So I'll get back into it. But
well, I can't wait to be a fly on the wall to see what comes next. Jason, where can people reach out? I don't know if you're accepting, LinkedIn requests, or I don't know if you're a Twitter guy. What's the best way? Yeah.
LinkedIn's the easiest way. Drop me a note, let me know what particular you want to talk to me or whatever. And I'm happy to chat. I almost never say no. I'm always happy to chat and help folks out. I was certainly for years, it was actually 18 years because of my other company that I founded that let me found this one. So whenever I got an hour of somebody's time who's been there, done that, it was so helpful for me. So I certainly am doing a lot of give back now. So yeah, if somebody wants some help, I'm happy to have them reach out on LinkedIn.
Well, that's very generous, and you've certainly given back to our audience. So I really appreciate doing that. Jason, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, John. Great chatting.
Hey, if you like today's episode, you're going to love my new book, The Art of Selling Your Business. The book was inspired by the cohort of my guests over the years who have been able to negotiate an exit far better than the benchmark in their industry, sometimes 2 or 3 times more than I would have expected. I was curious to understand the tactics and strategies of these entrepreneurs and what they do differently from average performers. The result is a playbook for punching above your weight when it comes to selling your business. To learn more, go to builttosell.com/selling, where we put together a collection of gifts for listeners who order the book. Just go to builttosell.com/selling.
Thanks for listening to Built to Sell Radio with John Warrillow. For complete show notes with links to additional resources, visit builttosell.com/blog. John is the founder of the Value Builder System. To find out how to improve the value of your business by 71%, visit valuebuildersystem.com. John is also the author of Built to Sell, Creating a Business That Can Thrive Without You, and The Automatic Customer, Creating a Subscription Business in Any Industry. Connect with John at facebook.com/builttosell or on Twitter at John Warrillow, WARRILLOW. Thanks for listening.